If you would like to support the podcast, you can click the Buy Us a Coffee link on our show notes or on our website. Your support helps us keep the podcast going, and we appreciate each of our listeners so much.
You can also rate and review us on Apple and Spotify, follow us on social media, and don't forget to tell your friends and family about us. I'm Darlene.
And I'm Melody.
This is
Hard Times and True Crimes.
One of the most important speeches ever given in North Carolina was made in Rockingham County in 1867, just after the Civil War ended, by Judge Thomas Settle, Jr., who lived in Rockingham County in a plantation house called Mulberry Island. Settle had once been a slave owner himself and served in the Confederate Army, but after the war, he became a loud voice for change and rights for black citizens. Settle spoke to a large group of black and white neighbors. He began his speech with, "You who were lately slaves, and you who but lately owned them, are here today as equals before the law, and should work together. Your rights and duties are mutual, and the sooner you understand them, the better for both. There is no reason why the two races should be enemies, but the many good reasons why they should be friends. Our common interests demands it." He continued, "My advice to the white men is to be kind and just to the colored men. Make fair and liberal contracts with them, and it is precisely the same to the colored men. Besides, the white and the colored man ought to rejoice together, for they are both greatly benefited by the end of slavery. I tell you frankly, we must make up our minds to look at several things in a different light from that in which we had been in the habit of viewing them, especially regarding education. We must bury 1,000 fathoms deep all those ideas and feelings that promoted those cruel laws against teaching African Americans." He urged, "Let schoolhouses dot our hills at convenient distances from all." "I tell you," Settle said, "the North, covered with railroads and canals, had flourished since it had got sense to get rid of slavery. Some of their educated labor and machinery, as well as their investment in industry, were exactly what the South needed. The most practical and ethical path to take would be to comply with congressional mandates, rejoin the Union as quickly as possible, and work with the newly established Republican Party in the state, who were trying to pull down none but to elevate all. We want to be a party of principle," he told the crowd. "Our thoughts and hopes should be on the future." He wanted to see the South develop and thrive. "This is the land of my birth. I do not propose to leave it. My children are here, and I wish them to have a government fit to live in." And he worked in the decades after the Civil War to bring about such a government, supporting the legal and political rights of all.
I want to thank Ricky Allred from here in Asheboro, North Carolina, for sharing this story with us and for researching and writing the majority of today's episode. I'll have the rest of my resources listed on the show notes. I met Ricky this past spring when I attended one of his historical tours here in Asheboro at the Old City Cemetery on Salisbury Street. He had on a sweatshirt that said, "I'd find you more interesting if you were dead." So he's our kind of people. Thanks again, Ricky. I also wanted to remind you that if you're interested in supporting the show, one very simple thing that you can do, go on Apple or Spotify and give us a 5-star review. That really helps our ratings and it just helps in the algorithm to get us noticed. Also, another way that you can support us is to go on our website, hardtimesandtruecrimes.com, and go to the Buy Me a Coffee link and buy us a $5 coffee. Those small things help the show more than you could possibly know. We just appreciate y'all so much. What are you drinking?
Actually, I'm just drinking water today. I've already had my coffee this morning.
But I'm drinking an Aspire healthy energy drink
Okay.
that I got from Sam's Club.
Does it taste good?
Yeah, it's really good. It has like ginger and there's no calories, no sugars, and no carbs.
Oh.
Yeah, they're really good.
I'll have to watch and see if you're really energetic after this.
Yeah, I wasn't in the mood for coffee today for some reason.
Yeah, me either. But don't let that deter you from buying a coffee.
Oh, yeah. Don't let that deter you at all. This case today that I'm going to talk about is another one from Asheboro.
Oh, good.
Well, kinda. You'll see. It ends up in Asheboro anyway. So it's about a man named Thomas Bowman. His nickname was Pink.
Oh.
Because, his name was actually Thomas Pinckney Bowman.
Okay.
He was born in Rockingham County, North Carolina, in 1839.
Okay.
And his parents were Ryle and Susan Bowman. He was the second of 5 children. Thomas had a pretty fortunate upbringing. He described his dad as an honored father, and his mother, Susan, was a great mother. Pink was born on a 1,000-acre plantation.
That's pretty big.
Yeah. He had it made when he was a kid. That community, his plantation was nicknamed Bowman Town. Have you heard of that? I feel like I've heard of Bowman
I don't think
Town.
I have, but is it around here?
I mean, Rockingham County, it's not an actual name of the town. It was a nickname. So his father served as a constable in their district in Rockingham for a little while. Their farm produced stuff like wheat, rye, corn, oats, peas, beans, sweet potatoes, butter, honey, lots of tobacco. Livestock on the farm, horses, mules, work oxen, milk cows, beef cattle, sheep, and hogs. And they also owned 16 slaves because this was pre-Civil War.
Yeah.
Only a couple hundred acres were used to farm, and they had all that. And the rest was just woodland.
Okay.
I'm going to go back, like I always do, and give the prior twos. So in 1843, when Pink was 13 years old, his father, Ryle, moved the family to Bibb County, Georgia.
Oh,
Do you remember Bibb County?
Yes.
Bloody Woolfolk.
Yes. Our very earlier episodes.
Yeah.
Wasn't that your second one?
Yep.
Yeah.
They moved to Bibb County to be close to Ryle's brother, John. John had moved south in 1829 and had convinced Ryle to buy up some land down there. And that land would become another Bowman plantation. When the family lived in Bibb County, Thomas started to kind of get into some bad habits. We're not exactly sure what those are, but I'm thinking probably drinking, women.
Women chasing.
Yeah, exactly. And you got to think he was coming of age. And I imagine being the son of a plantation owner probably came with some perks.
Yeah.
His dad's workers probably would do whatever he told him to do.
Mm-hmm.
And let him hang out with him even if they didn't want him to.
Yeah.
His parents, Ryle and Sarah, they had another son while living down there who unfortunately didn't live very long. So that was sad. And I'm not sure how long. It doesn't even say a name. So it could have been just like a day or, could have been up to a year or two. Things like that, though, are always hard on a family.
Sure. Absolutely.
And then Ryle's brother, Uncle John, died in Bibb County on December 16th in 1855. After his son's death and his brother's death, Ryle and Susan decided to go on back to Rockingham County, North Carolina. But Pink wasn't ready to leave. So he stayed with some relatives until 1859 when his mom got really sick with pneumonia. Thomas went back to Rockingham to be with his family, but at just 53, his mother would end up dying from pneumonia.
Yeah.
Now, less than 2 years later, in April of 1861, the American
Civil War.
officially broke out. And Pink was at prime fighting age.
Mm-hmm.
He joined the military, and he would have been 22 when he and his brother George joined Company K of the 13th Regiment of North Carolina State Troops. He joined on May 22nd in 1861. Now, the members of this company were recruited from Caldwell County, Mecklenburg, Davie, Edgecombe, and Rockingham counties.
Mm-hmm. All of those surrounding counties to us.
Yeah. The company's first action was hand-to-hand combat at the Battle of Williamsburg. Pink was wounded in Maryland in September of 1862 at the Battle of Mountain, or as Southerners called it, the Battle of Boonesborough Gap.
Mm-hmm.
That battle lasted until December 20th. Now, Thomas was recovered by then, but on that very day, December 20th, Pink took to the woods and deserted his company. He was a reported deserter until February 20th in 1864.
That's my birthday.
Is it?
Well, not 1864, but...
Oh, yeah, that's right. Our birthdays are just a few
3
days apart,
right?
Yeah. So I always thought, until I did some research because of this case, that deserters were shot.
Yeah.
I just thought that was a thing. If you desert, like, you're dead.
And you're saying they weren't?
No. Let me tell you what I found out.
Okay.
That in the South, rebels,
Yeah.
they deserted in droves.
Huh.
It's a possibility that had a lot to do with why the South lost.
Because there were so many deserters?
There were so many deserters. And actually, only 230 rebel soldiers were executed for desertion. And I mean thousands. Although shooting wasn't a thing. Well, I guess it was for 230 of them. But they typically branded. Yeah. Which, that doesn't sound very
branded
fun.
them?
They branded them, or sometimes like tattooed them. Like with a C for coward.
Oh, you're kind of giving me Yellowstone vibes here.
Yeah. Or they would flog them.
Oh.
Sometimes they didn't get anything. They were just like, get back in line. I mean, they probably needed
as many as they could get.
Bodies so bad that they weren't willing
Sure.
to shoot them.
Sure.
It is a fact, though, that rebel soldiers deserted in droves. Now, sometimes it wasn't because they were cowards. You know, a lot of these men were farmers. And as they learned about their homes and land being destroyed by Union soldiers, women being raped, barns being burned down, and worried that your family is stuck there.
Right.
Wondering, what was happening to them. A lot of them felt like their families and their homes were their primary responsibility.
Their priority.
Exactly. And so they felt justified to desert in order to go home and protect their families. And many of them did.
I can kind of see that.
Yeah, I can too. In North Carolina here, we have Quakers.
Right.
They were opposed to the war and they were opposed to violence, which we know that. And according to Encyclopedia, to escape being forced to fight for the Confederacy, Quaker men of military draft age would often hide out in the woods, or they would head northward over the mountains into Union territory.
There's a great movie about the Quakers during the Civil War. It's called Friendly Persuasion, because, the Quakers are called friends.
Yes.
It's called Friendly Persuasion. Have you seen this?
No, I want to now.
It's an older movie.
Okay.
And the guy who plays the son that's a Quaker that's going into the Civil War is the same guy that plays Norman Bates in Psycho.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So-
I've got to watch that.
And it's a good movie because it's also funny. There's a lot of comedy in it.
Okay.
And Gary Cooper is in it. Yeah.
Well, I'm excited. I'll definitely check that out. So you had the Quakers, you had the family men, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then there were those who, they just didn't want to fight.
They were scoundrels.
Yeah. And so they would hide out in hills, caves, and swamps of the South where they would turn into criminals and prey on their Southern fellow men.
Unsuspecting people, yeah.
Yeah, just to survive. So let me just say this. Thomas, Pink, and Mr. Bowman.
They're all the same.
They're all the
One and the
same.
same.
I'm not sure if Thomas suffered any consequences, but on February 20th, 1864, he was brought back to fight in the war. 3 months later, on May 5th in 1864, he was wounded again at the Battle of Wilderness in Virginia and was recovering through October of 1864. He may have deserted again after that. There are local legends that say he hid out in a cave with his brother, George Ryle, who had deserted in Fredericksburg, Virginia.
Okay.
And I did quite a bit of research about Company K of the 13th Regiment of North Carolina that Thomas and his brother were in during the war. And even though they deserted along with lots of other men, they were involved in some bloody battles. I can't imagine that they came home unchanged by
I'm
what
sure
they
they did
saw
not, yeah.
and experienced on those battlefields. They probably, I'm sure that they missed like the companionship of a woman.
Yeah.
I'm sure. felt ready for some like normalcy. Is that a word? Normalcy? Yeah. Anyway, right after Pink came home in 1865, he met and married a girl named Teresa Ann Cannon. They were very happy in the beginning. He said later that he did not marry her for beauty or for money because she had neither.
Oh my goodness. Did he say, who did he say that to?
He said that in a newspaper. Like he was given an interview. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure he probably had said that to her before.
Golly. Within a year, they had a little girl that they named Eliza Jane, who they called Baby.
Oh.
She was the apple of both of their eyes for sure. Pink said that he and Thurza tried. Okay. Her nickname was Thurza.
Okay, so we have Thurza, Pink, and Baby.
Yes.
Got it.
Pink said that he and Thurza tried as hard as any husband and wife could to live together and be happy. But not far into their marriage, he admitted that he started gambling and drinking heavily, which that's why I kind of go back to the war thing. Now we know about PTSD and how people are changed by those things. And he did say that I was never really satisfied at home anymore. I don't know if he meant he was restless or if he wasn't satisfied with her. I'm not 100% sure, what he meant by that. But I know that at some point he co-signed on a $6,000 note and they nearly lost everything that they had over it. Thankfully, some of Thurza's relatives stepped in and helped save them from being ruined. And they were not too fond of Pink, her family.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah,
sure
so her brothers did not like him. In fact, when her parents died, he took them to court.
Pink took the family to court?
Yeah, because I guess she was she would have been entitled to some of the land. So yeah, there was like a whole
over the inheritance.
Yep. And then Pink killed somebody's horse, supposedly by accident. I don't know how that happened, but
how do you kill somebody's horse by accident?
I have no idea. I'm assuming some of these crazy things came as a result of his heavy drinking.
Okay.
Probably. But anyway, things were getting a little hairy for Pink and Rockingham. So between 1867 and 1869, he took his wife and daughter and they moved to Irwin, Georgia. He had lived there before. He really liked living in Georgia.
Yeah, he didn't want to come back the first time, you said.
Right. So he went on back down there and they bought about $1,200 worth of property. Pink farmed and worked in timber. While he was in Georgia, Teresa, she got a bad cough one day that did not go away. Her health just started to decline. She ended up being diagnosed with what they called back then consumption.
Okay. And that's same TB. As tuberculosis.
Yeah, tuberculosis. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Thomas took his wife to the doctor, but they said that there was really little that they could do for her. It looked as if she was actually going to die, but much to everybody's surprise, Thurza pulled through.
That's unusual for TB patients back then, I think.
It is. But she'd been weakened, considerably by the disease. And you'd think she'd stop smoking her pipe and chewing, but she kept right on at it.
That's funny.
Sometime around 1872, the family returned to Bowman Town in Rockingham County, where they started out to help Pink's father, Ryle, on the farm. And less than a year later, Pink became the official overseer of the plantation when his dad, Ryle Bowman, passed away in 1873. The Bowmans lived in a single-room log cabin situated on a picturesque ridge overlooking Hogan's Creek. There was a separate log kitchen, which I guess was pretty standard at the time. Actually, they had people living in that kitchen.
What do you mean?
Like, I'm guessing tenants.
That lived just like in a kitchen?
I think they probably were more like, they probably served the family. But yeah, a mother and daughter lived in the kitchen.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. There were also several other tiny log cabins all over the plantation where tenant farmers lived.
Okay.
Probably before that, they would have been the slave dwellings.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if the chicken or the egg came first. But as Thurza's health deteriorated and she was in constant excruciating pain, she became irritable, jealous, bitter, constantly berating and tearing down her husband. But Pink consoled himself as he fell in love,
of course,
with a young black or biracial girl or young woman. I'm not sure. She was young. I know that. Named Eliza McCain, who lived with one of his tenant farmers on the Bowman plantation, about 300 or 400 yards from his own house.
And this is where the real scoundrel comes out in him.
He neglected his sick wife to spend time with his new love interest.
Question, and you may get to this. Is this new love interest also interested in him?
I mean, I believe so. I believe it was, yeah. So with her illness, Thurza had terrible coughing fits and awful burning pain in her chest almost constantly. Her doctor, James Thomas Warr, prescribed whiskey to ease her suffering. According to a lot of different witnesses, she started drinking a lot. Thankfully, she had her daughter, Eliza Jane, who helped her in every way that she could. Despite a turbulent home life, Eliza Jane, she just seemed like such a mature, tender-hearted, good little girl. She's almost 12 at this point.
I was going to ask.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Poor Thurza, though, she had actually been pregnant with 5 other children.
Oh, goodness.
Some she miscarried and others died soon after they were born.
Oh, that's always tragic.
Yes.
So
you
she's
can
probably
see
self-medicating with that whiskey, the pain, the physical pain and the emotional pain.
Right. But you can see, too, why Eliza Jane was so special to her parents.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Pink was gone from home a lot. And then I'm thinking about this. You know, he said he didn't marry her for her looks because apparently she didn't have none. So I'd imagine her condition aged her. And she was already about 3 or 4 years older than him.
Okay.
And back then, women typically aged faster.
Right. They didn't have oil of Olay.
Exactly. And they, you know, were having babies like all the time. And on top of all that, for her, she was sick.
Yeah.
Constantly coughing up phlegm and blood. Not to mention, I don't know if she was contagious. What I'm saying is, I don't know that they had a very intimate
relationship.
Right.
You know what I mean? It doesn't sound like they did.
Yeah.
And he's already out somewhere else.
And again, I want to say that according to many witnesses, she was brutal.
Okay.
To Thomas. And this is not me making excuses for him because he took vows to Thurza. He chose to marry her. And he said for better or for worse, in sickness and in health.
Yeah. It is a vow for a reason.
Yeah, exactly. On Monday morning of April 30th in 1877, Thurza woke up a little before daybreak. And she was feeling good that day, better than she had in weeks. She'd been bedridden for days, weakened, you know, by her disease. But this morning she got up, she got dressed, she went outside and the ground was still wet with dew. When she just started doing her chores, she fed her chickens, she hollered over to the women in the kitchens and told them to start a fire. Pink, you know, he was already up and went to get an armful of wood to start the fire, probably in the house, I guess. She went inside and took her dose of whiskey that her doctor had prescribed, and she started fixing breakfast. But within a few minutes, she felt strange. So strange that she yelled loud for P to come in and help her. Eliza Jane...
For who?
For Pink. She called him P. Eliza Jane heard her mom, and so she came running as well. And they helped Thurza down onto the floor, where she was screaming and violently convulsing and clutching her husband and her daughter. Thurza and Eliza Jane were both crying and screaming. Thurza saying, "I'm dying." I mean, she was, it was scary. And I just feel so bad for this little girl. Can you imagine seeing your mother like that? So anyway, the neighbor, Martha Cole, was on her way to the Bowman house that morning, actually at sunrise. She heard Thurza and Eliza Jane hollering. By the time she made it to the house and walked in, Pink had his elbow up on the bureau and was crying. Martha walked over to Thurza. The covers were up over her head. And Martha asked Pink if his wife was dead, but he just bowed his head. So she felt of her wrist and noticed that she still had a strong pulse.
Okay.
Thurza's back was arched. Her hands and feet were drawn in some. Martha ran to get her mom and dad and brought them back over with her. Not to mention the lady that lived in the kitchen, come over. Her mouth, so her head was kind of reared back. Her mouth was almost closed. Her arms were crossed over her chest. And when Martha would try moving them higher up on her chest, they would slip right back into place. Her elbows were unusually stiff. Actually, her whole body seemed stiff, but her neck was throbbing.
That sounds like poison.
It does. Her neck was throbbing and swollen. Within a couple of hours, they were dressing her body for burial. Thurza passed away. And as was custom at the time, Martha and several other ladies from the area would gather to dress her body for burial. Martha would say that it took over half an hour to finish dressing her because of how stiff her body had become. Yeah. Her hands were clenched tight. Her toes were pulled under her feet. Her head was drawn, towards her back. When they tried moving it forward to get her dress over her head, Thurza's whole body would raise up.
Yeah. I mean, that sounds, I've heard of rigor mortis, but that had not had time to set in, right?
No.
So this is something, an effect of whatever.
Yeah,
she
because
has
her body
ingested.
was still warm.
Okay.
So she wasn't, that had not set in. She was placed in a simple wooden coffin wearing an all-black silk dress that she had picked out herself sometime back for burial. Teresa Ann Bowman was laid to rest at 47 years old in the community cemetery just west of Bowmantown in Rockingham County. We know that they had been married at least 12 years. We're not 100% sure how many, because I've heard they were married for over 20 years. I've heard they were married for 15. I've heard 10.
Yeah.
It's just difficult to say. It happened a long time ago. Before the earth had settled around her grave, people in the area began to discuss the troubling circumstances around Thurza's death.
Yeah, those did not go unnoticed.
No. She had told several people that she expected to meet an untimely death. That her husband was carrying on an affair, and that she was afraid of her husband, Bird Williamson, and Eliza McCain.
And Eliza McCain was the girl that he was seeing.
Yes.
And their daughter's name was also Eliza.
Yes,
Okay.
Eliza Jane. So that's why I try to always say
Yes,
Eliza Jane with her.
Eliza McCain.
Yep.
Okay.
Thurza had specifically said that she was afraid of being poisoned.
Oh, interesting.
Yes. This talk eventually reached Joseph P. Cannon, Thurza's brother. Shocked and angry, he went to the county courthouse in Wentworth on May 22nd in 1877 and filed an affidavit stating he believed his sister had been murdered by her husband. On that basis, Judge William B. Cox issued a bench warrant for the arrest of Thomas P. Bowman on suspicion of murder. E.H. Hancock was appointed as a special coroner with the authority to investigate Thurza's death. The coroner's jury convened at the county courthouse to hold an inquest over her body. The jury heard testimony from a number of witnesses over the next 3 days, to decide, is this work, are we going to pursue this or not?
Right.
And the first to testify was a neighbor named Green Cole. I want to give a disclaimer here that some of the language here is not my own. I'm just stating words that were used.
A quote, a direct quote.
Exactly, a direct quote of the time.
Yes.
So keep that in mind.
Which is insensitive today, but
absolutely
to remain true to the details of the story.
Yes. Yeah. So again, this was 1877.
Right.
Just after the Civil War. Okay. So in the months prior to her death, Thurza had repeatedly told Cole that she expected to be put to death in some way. She told him her husband had taken up with a Negro woman and he was little at home. She said that he'd threatened to kill her and throw her out of the house. She said that she had wanted to go to court for protection and had invited neighbors to go with her. She specifically stated that her husband had threatened to go to Reidsville to buy poison that he could throw in her face that would make her sleep and wake no more.
Oh, goodness. Brutal.
Yeah. Green Cole's daughter, Martha Cole, testified next. Now, she was the one who'd come to the Bowman house that morning to see Thurza. She stated that she'd been to see Thurza the day before, that Sunday, April 29th, and that as she was leaving that Sunday afternoon, Thurza begged her to come back that evening. She said she expected to be killed in some way before morning. Martha told her she doubted Thomas was as mean as that. Thurza insisted that she didn't know him that well and that there was something going on.
But that's why Martha was coming at like 6:30 in the morning or whatever that morning.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That's why she was coming so early.
Because I was thinking that was kind of an early to be paying a neighborly visit.
Right. Exactly.
Okay.
So to satisfy Thurza, she actually came back for a few minutes again that evening. And then when she came back to the house the next morning, that's when she'd found Thurza nearly dead. She said Thurza had bubbles forming around the corners of her mouth and that her arms were stiffening at the elbows. Martha would say she overheard one of the Bowman's tenants, a black lady named Miss Mary Cobb, say to Eliza Jane, "I wish I knew her last words." "I'll tell you what they were," Eliza Jane said. "Mama told Papa she was poisoned and got it in that drink of liquor he gave her that morning." She also said she visited with Thurza often and had never seen her husband mistreat his wife in any way. Now, the next to testify was the Bowman's daughter, Eliza Jane, who was described as going on 12. Now, Eliza Jane said her mother took sick and complained of pain in her breast, said she was dying, and then died, all within the course of 10 minutes. Eliza stated that she and her papa held their mother. She said her mother seemed strong, but jerked and trembled. She also said she didn't see her mother take anything, nor had her mother said anything about being poisoned. Eliza Jane said her mother had been up, dressed, and was doing her usual work when she was stricken. She'd been sick for the past 4 weeks and in bed a good part of that time. And so she had been really sick, and she coughed, for years. But she said for the past few days, her mother hadn't been able to cough.
Okay.
Which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting.
So she said that morning she never heard her cough like one time. So that's something. Susan Cole was next. She testified that Thurza told her she expected to be put to death on account of that Negro woman, Eliza McCain. She said her husband spent most of his time at Bird Williamson's place where she lived. Thurza said she planned to go to court and lay everything out. She said Thurza told her Mr. Bowman had thrown her out of the house, doused her with water, and threatened to kill her if she came back in. So there's that. Now, James Robinson testified, and he was a clerk. He was actually only 15 years old at Callum's drugstore in Reedsville. And he testified that Pink Bowman came to the store 3 weeks, April 21st, 1877, and bought a bottle of strychnine, which he said that he was going to use to kill crows. Now, Mr. Callan, the owner of the store, had been out that day, but Mr. Bowman happened to come back in because he wanted to make sure that what he was buying was strychnine, because this was a powder and he had only ever seen the grains.
Okay, yeah.
Now, do keep in mind, people did buy strychnine.
Yes.
All the time back then.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I mean, they were like killing rodents and that kind of thing. Yes. It wasn't like an unusual thing, I don't think.
Especially on a farm.
Right.
They really did have to kill crows because, they were trying to protect their crops.
Yeah.
Lizzie Dill, she was the one that lived in the Bowman kitchen. She had been living there for about 18 months. And on the Sunday before her death, she said Thurza had coughed severely, which is interesting because Eliza said she couldn't cough. So I don't know.
Well, Eliza said that was in the last few days. So how?
She said the day before she was coughing.
Oh.
And so who knows?
Yeah.
But that just goes to show that I don't think purposely, but sometimes people get facts
inaccurately. I mean, you can have witness testimonies that definitely contradict each other, and it doesn't mean one's necessarily lying.
That's a minor detail, but
maybe not.
Yeah, exactly. She said Thurza had complained of severe pain in her breast and that she'd gone to bed Sunday. She said that Mr. and Mrs. Bowman lived on disagreeable terms because of Thurza's jealousy of the Negro woman, Eliza McCain. A Negro man, Bird Williamson, that is who Eliza McCain lived with him. Not, I think it was like maybe a niece or even a stepdaughter. It wasn't like they were not in a relationship. She was quite a bit younger than him.
I would say black man there, if you're not quoting somebody.
No, I am.
Oh,
quoting
you are?
her.
Okay.
Yeah. You can say that and then we'll keep that in.
Okay.
So they know.
Yeah.
Okay. No, that is her quote.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. A Negro man, Bird Williamson, came to the house and told Mr. Bowman he needed to make his wife behave because she had been telling lies on him and Eliza McCain. Mr. Bowman said nothing in defense of his wife, which I guess was a big deal at the time, allowing a black man to speak to his white wife that way. She said that Thurza suspected her husband of taking part of her liquor and giving it to Eliza McCain, and that she believed that he had filled the rest up with water. She said Thurza told her there were 2 persons on the place she feared would poison her. She didn't identify the persons, but Dill suspected they were Eliza McCain and Bird Williamson. She didn't think it was Thurza's husband. She didn't think she was afraid of her husband, nor did she have any reason to be. She lives in the kitchen.
Yeah.
Right there.
Yeah.
So she's with them a lot. She said she lived there for 18 months.
Okay.
She actually said there was only one time that he lost his patience with her. And he did throw water on her and did set her outside.
Oh.
But she said this was after a lot of
being provoked, maybe?
Yeah. And she said, I'm coming back in. And he said, I'll beat your brains out if you do.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, that's terrible. I'm not laughing.
But you can, you can imagine this scene in your head.
Yes.
I'm forming an opinion here as you're telling this story. I'm forming my own little theory of what I think happened.
Okay. I have my own theory, too.
Okay.
Mary Jane Dill lived with her mother in the Bowman kitchen. She said she got over to the house that morning just as Thurza died and heard Thurza say that she got poison from the liquor that Pink gave her. And he told her to hush. She said that as far as she knew, Thurza had used up all of her liquor and hadn't taken any that morning. She stated she'd never seen Mr. Bowman mistreat Thurza and that he seemed to grieve greatly at her death. So it seems like they're trying to give actual facts.
Mm-hmm. There sure were a lot of witnesses to this event.
Well, because of all the tenant farmers. Right. Dr. James T. Wire testified that he'd visited Thurza a week prior to her death. He said she'd been very sick and coughed up a great deal of matter. He suspected that she had an abscess open in her lung and that the matter was pus from that abscess. Yeah. Ugh. He suspected Thurza would die at any time. And that's one of the reasons that he prescribed her good whiskey and a nourishing diet for her condition, because she's in a lot of pain.
Yeah.
Rufus Lynn, a deputy summoned by Sheriff Burnett to assist in arresting Pink, testified that he and the sheriff found Mr. Bowman at Bird Williamson's house dressed in his night clothes on the floor of the McCain woman's room.
Uh-oh.
When they came to arrest him. Mm. When confronted, Bowman said he'd die before being arrested and that they were mistreating an innocent man. Dr. T.W. McKean testified that he assisted in a post-mortem exam when they exhumed her body, but that her remains were really too decomposed to give indications of disease, and that her stomach and bowels were empty as if they'd been purged. There was, however, a great deal of blood on the left side of her chest, as though a large vessel had given way, an occurrence that could have killed her.
Yeah.
But he said that a large dose of strychnine could have caused muscle spasms, but it wouldn't have caused that rupture.
Okay, now that's interesting.
Yeah, it is. So after hearing all the testimony, the coroner's jury, they believed that suspicion pointed to Thomas Bowman and that he should be bound over to the county. Thomas was formally indicted for his wife's murder on September 1st, 1877. The indictment specified the cause of death, strychnine poison, placed in a bottle of liquor and given to the victim. You can imagine that the newspapers were having a heyday.
Oh, I'm sure.
So here's one of the stories.
And those headlines back then, they did not, they were not politically correct in any means.
No, they were not. One article said the writer had difficulty believing that any mortal man could so crust his heart, as it were, with the iron of sin, that he could coolly devise and execute a plan that would result in murdering the wife of his bosom, the mother of his children, so that he might cast himself into the arms of his black paramour.
Dramatic much?
Seriously. The articles, they went on to say that for cold-blooded atrocity and desperate, determined coolness, this murder stands without parallel in the criminal records of the county. There is not a shadow of a reasonable doubt, but that in addition to the murdering of his wife, he is a member of an organized band of robbers who, in addition to making frequent raids upon their neighbor's property, are today practicing a system of free love, which, like a moral cancer, is eating into the vitals of this community. However, the reporter was careful to note he wasn't trying to prejudice anybody.
that reporter has a flair for the dramatic, for sure.
Yes.
And that's just funny.
It is.
Sorry.
Because of the negative publicity surrounding the case, Thomas Bowman filed an affidavit with the court stating that he was not going to receive a fair trial in Rockingham County. And Judge Cox agreed. And so Bowman, he was remanded to Guilford County for trial. The proceeding convened in the Guilford County Courthouse, which stood on the site now occupied by the Jefferson Insurance Building in Greensboro.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know where that's at?
I do.
Okay, well, that's where his trial was.
Okay.
Judge Ralph P. Buxton of Cumberland County was residing over the December term of Superior Court. Buxton was known as a careful and conservative jurist.
He was over the jury pool.
Okay, got it. That makes sense. I've never been a jury, so.
Me either.
Unfortunately.
And I'm not salty about it at all.
Your husband has all the luck.
Yeah.
Among other assignments, he had presided over the grand jury that had indicted Tom Dula.
Oh, that was one of our episodes. And when you started this story talking about the Civil War and that regiment in North Carolina, I thought of Tom Dooley because remember, he also...
So the Guilford County Sheriff was ordered to assemble a pool of 150 men from which the jury could be selected. The jury was impaneled on December 13th, 1877, and the trial began.
And I'm guessing back then women could not be on the jury.
Oh, no. Women couldn't bear to hear those sorts of things. Little did they know all these years later.
Nor could we make rational decisions.
Exactly.
We were too emotional to make a rational, logical choice.
Okay, so most of the testimony in, this trial is very similar to the testimonies given when the coroner's inquest.
Yes.
So I'm not going to go over all that, but I will go over a few new things.
Okay.
A lady named Louisa Lynn, who was identified as a colored woman, she testified while holding a baby in her arms that she and her husband had previously lived on the Bowman place, had come to know the family very well. I think they lived in her kitchen, as a matter of fact. She says that about 3 weeks before Mrs. Bowman's death, Mr. Bowman came to her house and offered her husband Gad some corn, a suit of clothes, and a hog if he would poison Mrs. Bowman.
Okay.
Yes. And Clint McCain, a black man, he testified that he actually heard this conversation in the Lynn home. But now there was a little bit of an axe to grind between them and Mr. Bowman because her husband Gad had broken into somebody's home. So Mr. Bowman thrashed him.
Okay.
And threw them out.
So their testimony could be questionable based on their history.
Right. So Miss Elizabeth Dill lived in the kitchen building on the Bowman place with her daughter. She'd been away the Sunday night before the death. She stayed with her sick sister, who lived about 5 miles away. So she actually wasn't there that morning when she died. She said that they had called and said that her sister was really sick. And so she was going to go, but then the weather kind of got bad. And she was like, yeah, I don't know. I might not go. And that Mr. Bowman was like, if it was me, I would go be with my sister. Kind of like he was trying to get her out, like get her away from there. That's how she, I think, took it.
Okay.
So she ended up going. When she returned home the next day about noon, Thurza was already dead. Thomas Bowman told her that they had already started telling people a story that he had poisoned his wife. Bowman said when he got to his wife that she gripped him with a grip such as no man has ever gripped him, and that she tried to bite him. Could have been in pain.
Yeah.
I guess.
It's odd, but yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the grip, when you're in pain, you do
but
grip
the
somebody,
bite.
but the bite's a little odd.
Yeah. So she then grabbed their daughter and said, baby, I'm dying, and then went off to sleep, is what he said. On Wednesday, Bowman asked Dill if she had heard any more of that awful report, to which Dill replied yes, and the story has started with Eliza Jane. Bowman then asked Eliza if she had said such a thing, to which this is a testimony of Elizabeth Dill. She said that Eliza said, yes, it's the truth, and I did not know any better than to tell it. She says she didn't say that, though.
Okay. There's a lot of he said, she said.
There is.
I mean, you've got people who are testifying and then the rest of the testimony is just contradictory. It's very hard to follow and very hard to get a clear picture of this.
Yeah, it really is. Dill went on to say that she had heard conversations coming from the Bowman house. She lived right there, including threats that Thomas Bowman made to his wife, and arguments between Thurza Bowman and Bird Williamson, in which Thurza accused Williamson of having a bad house. Dill stated that Eliza McCain lived with Bird and Sylvia Williamson on the Bowman place. The defense team asked Dill where her husband was.
Mm-hmm.
Because, they were wanting to kind of smear her a little bit,
right.
like tarnish her a little bit. She said that she doesn't know, that as far as she knew, that he had went to Yanceyville and got a divorce. She stated that she had become so poor during the war that she had no shoes to wear to court and thus was unable to contest the divorce.
Oh, wow. That's very sad.
It is. She also stated that she thought that Thurza Bowman was afraid of her husband, of Bird Williamson, and of Eliza McCain. Dill said that Thurza often talked of the clothes in which she wanted to be buried. She also coughed a great deal and often coughed up phlegm. The next to testify was a professor, Alexander Redd, from the faculty of the University of North Carolina. Professor Redd taught physics and chemistry at the university, and he'd been present at the second post-mortem examination.
Right,
so they actually...
This is the testimony I've been waiting for.
Yeah.
I want to know the scientific medical facts here.
This was conducted on July 24th, 1877. She died in April.
Mm-hmm.
So this is 3 months later. Now, the defense objected to all of this evidence because, first of all, they said that the prisoner wasn't present when it was conducted.
Doesn't have to be present for that, does
the
it?
court was like,
no.
No, we're overruled. Yeah. They took out her heart, her liver, her kidneys, her spleen, her colon, and a part of her brain. Keep in mind now, this is being done in the cemetery.
Oh gosh. And
2 months after her death.
Her brain? And this is bizarre.
On a body that has previously been autopsied, mind you.
Wow.
On a hot July day.
Oh gosh.
Here in North Carolina. There was a presence of strychnine.
Okay, I need to, yeah.
Yeah. 3 medical experts offered opinions that based on the circumstances of the case, though, that she had died from strychnine poisoning.
Okay. And that was the medical testimony.
That was. And the prosecution rested its case. The defense, they had subpoenaed, a large number of witnesses, including their own medical experts. They actually elected not to call any of them at trial. The reason, according to Governor Reed, was that the state's case was so flimsy that the counter witnesses they felt unnecessary.
I don't know. That doesn't sound like good attorney work to me.
I don't think so either. Governor Reed offered a wide and somewhat rambling menu of reasons as to why the state had failed to prove its case. From that, the ingredients of strychnine could occur naturally in the soil and could have contaminated Thurza Bowman's body, and that the old hag, Lizzie Dill,
Oh my goodness.
had opportunity to murder Mrs. Bowman, that Eliza McCain had the motive to murder Mrs. Bowman, and finally that Thurza Bowman may have been so distraught that she could have taken it herself.
That was my theory.
Honestly, I kind of feel the same way.
Really? Was that yours?
And that is what her husband believes.
Okay.
So following the closing argument, Judge Buxton issued a careful charge to the jury, kind of instructing them, like, this is, well, they
Yes.
give them the points of the law and tell them how to evaluate testimony.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so in the end, the state's case had strength apparently, and a guilty verdict was returned on December 20th, 1877.
Okay.
Anyway, they asked for a new trial,
Mm-hmm.
and it was granted. The gist of the opinion was that the expert witness, Dr. Gregory, had been improperly questioned. He'd been asked to assume the facts presented by the prosecution, strychnine found in the body, those kinds of things. So the court ruled that the questions should have been structured so that the jury would not have been led to assume the truth of the evidence.
Okay. That makes sense.
That does make sense. Yeah, I thought that was good. But that the conditions presented were hypothetical.
Okay.
This ruling was used for many years to come in North Carolina law schools.
Oh, that's cool.
To teach the proper questioning of expert witnesses. The court ordered a new trial and a change of venue for Mr. Bowman. Judge Almond McKay, presiding over the spring term of Guilford Superior Court, ordered Bowman remanded to Randolph County for a new trial.
Okay, that's where we come in.
That's where we come in, yes. Good old Asheboro. The Bowman saga now moved to Randolph County. The legal teams arrived in Asheboro in late August of 1878, setting up lodging in Page's Hotel.
Oh.
Yep. The attorneys were treated as celebrities.
Okay, yeah.
Particularly Governor Reed. They were stared at, occasionally serenaded, and several were encouraged to enter or to re-enter politics. Many of the lawyers commented on the fine food available in Asheboro, particularly the watermelon.
I can confirm.
Yep.
We do have some fine food here and good watermelons.
Yes, we do. James Reed of the prosecution team was said not to socialize with the other attorneys, but he stayed in his room and he worked on the case. So he was serious about getting this conviction. Superior Court convened in the Randolph County Courthouse, which in 1878 stood at the intersection of Main and Salisbury Street. Bowman was transported to Asheboro on August 24th, and the murder indictment was filed on the 26th. The trial began on Tuesday, August 27th. Judge John Kerr of Caldwell County was presiding. Judge Kerr, at the end of a long legal career, was also a lay preacher, and he served as an early president of the North Carolina Baptist State Convention.
Oh, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm. He was complimentary of the citizens attending the trial and said that they were the best behaved of any county, except for Iredell. He was not complimentary of the local roads, however. He said that the road from Union Mills, Randleman, was nearly impossible, and that the citizens should hold those responsible for its maintenance accountable.
Oh, that's funny. Even today, the courthouse sits on a city block off of Salisbury Street, and that is the worst road. I mean, potholes everywhere. So, hey,
Yep.
Some things never change.
Judge Kerr, he ran a strict court. Like, he did not play games. When a late arriving spectator took a seat in the jury box, Judge Kerr ordered the man to get out of that box, after which the offender left as if he had been shot with a musket. The judge also banished a number of crying babies from the courtroom. No transcript for the Randolph County trial exists, It probably happened a lot like it did in Guilford County.
Yeah.
Like that trial had, taken place. Testimony ended on Thursday afternoon. Closing arguments consumed Thursday evening and Friday morning. And then after an earnest and impressive charge by Judge Kerr, the jury began deliberations at 2 p.m. Early on Saturday morning, August 31st, 1878, the jury returned a verdict of guilty. Judge Kerr sentenced Bowman to death, and he set the execution date for October 4th of 1878. The defense counsel made application for an appeal to the state Supreme Court, to which Judge Kerr, he agreed. He was like, yeah, that's fine. It didn't work. They felt like they had done a good job, and that was the verdict, and that it was a fair verdict.
Okay.
And so that was that. But it did buy him some time. So the eyes of North Carolina were now focused on Asheboro.
Yes.
And on the morning of Friday, August 29th, 1879, Thomas Bowman rose after a good night's sleep, and he ate his final breakfast. People began streaming into Asheboro. By Friday morning, every road in every direction was jammed with vehicles filled to overflowing, with young and old, black and white, rich and poor, coming to witness the day's execution.
Oh, goodness. And was this going to be a hanging?
Yes. At noon, Sheriff Milliken, keep that name in your back pocket, Sheriff Milliken.
Okay.
With an armed guard of 50 men and accompanied by several newspaper reporters, came for the prisoner.
50 men? Good crowd control because of that many people.
That's true. The wagon traveled about 3/4 of a mile out the Salisbury Road to Worth's Field, now the site of the Bosong Hosiery Building.
Oh, yeah, I know. Okay, so that's right there, where before you hit the bypass.
That's where the gallows was constructed.
Oh, interesting.
The gallows had to be set up outside of town in order to accommodate the crowd. Estimated by some reporters as 10,000 people in Asheboro. Wow.
That would even be a lot today.
Golly. Asheboro's population at the time was around 250.
Oh, gracious.
30 minutes past 12, under his escort, Bowman, he was taken from the jail and resting upon his coffin in the wagon.
Oh,
that rode him
weird.
to the gallows. Yeah. But when he got there, he, got on the gallows. And it said that he looked pale, like he was obviously nervous.
Yeah.
They sang the hymn, "While Life Prolongs Its Precious Light."
I've never heard of that one.
I haven't either.
I thought I knew all the old hymns.
And then there were a few appropriate
words
said. Exactly. A fervent prayer. And the sheriff asked if he had anything to say. And he said, "My friends, I am innocent of the charge for which I am about to die."
I feel kind of bad for him.
I know. "If I did anything wrong, I was ignorant in doing it. And if I was guilty of any crime, I do not know it. I am ready to die. My only regret is leaving my little daughter behind me. I have made my peace with God."
Oh.
I have nothing more to say.
I mean, if he's innocent, I feel bad for this guy, really bad.
Yeah. Okay, well, I got to say this first. So he would not die for some reason with his boots on. He took off his boots.
He didn't say why?
So he stood there in his stocking feet.
Okay.
And then at 1:47, the sheriff put the black cap over his head and he adjusted the rope. Bidding him goodbye, the sheriff descended, and at 1:51, the trap fell, and with a heavy thud, the criminal swung in midair. His neck was broken.
Okay.
So that was a mercy.
Yeah.
But they didn't pronounce him dead until all life, had
all
left his body,
signs.
which was like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
10 minutes. In a short time, his body was taken down. It was placed in a pine coffin. They always do something crazy when there's a hanging. William Lynn, which was actually Bowman's nephew by marriage, he came to witness the hanging. And he, along with a young boy with the last name of Pascal, they were claiming the body. And they were going to bring it back to Rockingham County. Well, they stopped in Greensboro for the night, and they were approached by Jesse Cherry, who was a law student, and he wanted to photograph the body.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah. So he offered to pay, so they obliged. They opened the coffin, propped it up against a tree.
What in the world?
They admonished Bowman to look pleasant, and then they took the picture.
Oh, gosh.
And the photo was made into postcards, which were then sold around the state.
Oh, my goodness. I would love to see one of those postcards. You don't have a picture of one, do you?
No. I was going to say, while he was in jail, he also wrote his story, like his life story. And that was sold. They sold it so that he could raise money for his daughter.
Not just to be morbid.
No, but he wanted to tell his side of it.
Right.
Bowman was actually put into a community cemetery that's off Tate Road, Rockingham County. He was buried beside his wife at his request.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Most of the graves in the cemetery are marked with just plain, field stones. A county resident said that he was actually buried next to the Pascal family, which that would make sense because the boy that went with his nephew was a Pascal.
Right.
And his dad was also buried in that cemetery.
I mean, it does sound like the plot of a movie, but things happen. I mean...
And so, I was really thinking you were going to be like, no, he's terrible. Like, I thought you were going to think
Well, I don't think he was a great husband. I mean, he was cheating on her, and he did say some ugly remarks, and he did admit to drinking and stuff. But she she didn't sound like the greatest wife either there at the end.
Right.
So, I mean...
Yeah.
No, again, like you said, no excuses for him, but cheating on her does not make him a murderer.
Right.
We have to keep that in mind. Just because you're horrible at something else doesn't mean you're a murderer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, she was jealous for some reason.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, so.
Well, I think she was brush up on a couple of kind of last little things here. So Sheriff Milliken that we talked about, he was defeated for re-election, and probably because of his participation in the Bowman execution. Additionally, as a Quaker, he was expelled from the meeting for his association with the Bowman hanging.
Oh.
Milliken was not allowed back into the fellowship of his church until shortly before his death in 1915.
Interesting. Okay.
He is buried at Marlboro Friends Meeting.
Oh, I know where that's at.
Mm-hmm. Whatever happened to Eliza McCain, right?
Right.
Because I was like, why did they not question her? But it remains a mystery. It said that she disappeared shortly after the murder and she could not be located. The death certificate for Sylvia Williamson, which is Bird's wife, indicate that her maiden name was McCain prior to her marriage. So Eliza was probably her daughter or possibly her sister. And then Eliza Jane Bowman, the daughter, which is who we all want to know what happened to her. She was left orphaned, of course, by her father's execution and her mother's death. And she initially went to live with Joseph and Eliza Thacker, which was Aunt Eliza, Thomas Bowman's sister.
Okay.
Her dad's sister. But by 1880, she was living with Jane Dill, another aunt, and family in Locust Hill in Coswell County. She married Stephen Dill, her first cousin, who lived in the same household. In 1885, though, she married him in 1885, but he actually died in 1887. So she then married a man named John Hensley of Alamance County, eventually settling in the mill village of Ossipee. The Henleys had 9 children. They had 8 sons and a daughter. Eliza Bowman Hensley died in 1949 and is buried at Berea Christian Church near Elon, North Carolina.
Okay, so she and she had 9 kids. Is that what you said?
She had 9 children. Yeah. Yep. The execution of Thomas Bowman was one of the biggest events of the 19th century in Asheboro. And yet many of us don't know anything about it.
I had never heard that story, and I'm from here.
Yeah, and so I'm so thankful for Ricky Allred for sharing this story and just helping us with this episode.
Yes, he has given us some great information.
He sure has. He is definitely a friend of Hard Times and True Crime.
He is. I'm glad I had not read that story yet because it was better hearing it for the first time.
Yeah. Those sure were some hard times.
They sure were, especially for Thomas Bowman.
In his speech, Settle said, "Yankee notions are just what we want in this country." Well, I'll tell you, for the last 20 years, we've been loading all our Yankee notions into RVs and sending them to Florida. The war's over, but we're still winning. And the best way to protect yourself from this mob of angry shuffleboarders making their way across Central Florida is to make sure you download every episode of Hard Times and True Crimes. And tell everybody you know, and a few people you don't, to check us out. Till next time, goodbye.